Welcome back. One final point before we go tonight. 8 ways to stop gun violence. Number 1, we should abolish gun-free zones in schools. Is it a coincidence that the overwhelming majority of mass shootings happen in places where killers know that they will be the only one with a firearm? According to the Crime Prevention Research Center, from the 1950s through July 10th of 2016, 98.4% of mass shootings happened in gun-free zones. That means only 1.6% of mass shootings in the past 60 years happened where citizens were able to carry a firearm for self-defense. Think about that. What's going to deter a mass shooter? A sign that reads "Firearms prohibited on the premises," or a sign that reads "Staff on the premises is armed"? Any attempt to harm students will be met with immediate and deadly force. Number 2, we should empower teachers to conceal carry firearms. Funny how the mainstream media isn't reporting this student's opinion. Colton Hobb, a junior ROTC member at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School, he said, quote, "If Coach Feist had had his firearm in school that day, I believe he most likely could have stopped the threat." Remember, Coach Aaron Feist, the man who sacrificed his life to protect his students, he was a certified security guard, but he wasn't allowed to carry his firearm at school because the school was a gun-free zone. Number 3, we must secure schools with armed security guards. Public schools are government buildings filled with our children. What could possibly be a higher priority than to keep them safe? No other government building has as lax of security as schools, and that is insane. And if you're worried about the funding, I have a great idea. Why don't we take the $500 million we give to Planned Parenthood every year and use that to hire armed security guards for schools? Number 4, if you see something, say something. The FBI dropped the ball in a horrendous way after they were warned Nikolas Cruz was planning a mass shooting, and whomever and whatever process was neglected ought to be held accountable. But saying something did work in Washington state. A woman reported her grandson who'd been planning a mass school shooting. She reported to the police that he'd been writing in his journal about shooting up a specific school, and she found a rifle in a guitar case in his room. She told the police, and they stopped the attempted murderer before he became a mass killer. Number 5, maybe it's time we consider the pros and cons of gun violence restraining orders. These are limits placed on people restricting their ability to possess firearms if their families or close friends present to a court a serious belief that the individual is a danger to himself or others. The individual then has an avenue to object to the temporary restraining order in a court of law, in other words, due process. But the people who see these red flags most often are the family of the killers. Even if the killer hasn't been adjudicated mentally ill in a court and disqualified from owning firearms, perhaps we should study and debate the merits of gun violence restraining orders so we can do something when we see something. Number 6, that of course brings us to mental health. We have to be willing to talk about the controversial topics. Why is it that such an overwhelming majority of mass shooters in our recent history had absent fathers, like Dylann Roof, Adam Lanza, the Boston Bombers, and now Nikolas Cruz? What role does that play in the mental health and social behavior of mass shooters? And how can we as society, even our government, how can we promote stable family environments? How can we ignore the fact that children who grow up in fatherless homes are twice as likely to commit suicide? How does that correlate to homicide? It shouldn't be controversial to promote fatherhood and discourage men from abandoning their children. Let's start being honest about the consequences of absent fathers and the impact it has on mental health and on our society. Number 7, we also can't be afraid to recognize that many of the mass shooters in our country, like Sandy Hook shooter Adam Lanza and Columbine shooter Eric Harris, have been on black box psychiatric drugs that list homicidal ideation as a side effect. Nikolas Cruz's aunt says he too was medicated. If the side effect of a medication lists homicidal ideation, is it logical to blame the firearm for that behavior? No, it's not. And it's something we can't be afraid to study. Number 8, finally, we have to look at history. Gun control laws in our nation haven't stopped crime. If there is a gun control law that has lowered the crime rate, please let me know. But no liberal has been able to point out what it is. The assault weapons ban of the 1990s, that didn't impact the crime rate. Crime went down at the same rate before and after that ban. The Brady Bill, there's been no evidence that that law lowered crime rates. But Chicago has some of the toughest gun control legislation on the books, and their crime rate is horrifying. Same thing in Baltimore. So why are people pushing to ban guns when our history shows that that does not keep people safe? Listen, there is no magic potion to solve gun violence, but these are my 8 ideas. Some can be implemented immediately, and they should be, and some require study and debate. Let me know what you think, and tell me your ideas. And that is my final point. You can reach me on Twitter at Liz_Wheeler. If you liked the show, please send me an email at oann.com/contact. In the meantime, catch us here tomorrow at 9 p.m. Eastern. And until then, have a good night.